Hello, welcome again to the YouTube series Papa Lee and the Aliens. I am your host and narrator, Henry Lee Chenault, aka Mystery Answer Man, aka Papa Lee. Today's episode will cover the first universe. Before we begin, I've got a little housekeeping I need to do. Last episode, I showed you this picture of Whitley Strieber's picture of the alien that he had in his book. I failed to show you the picture of my alien, so this was the picture he drew. It's actually a picture of a gray. He draws it as a real figure. This is what I saw. I saw 4 of these that night on my encounter. This is actually a suit. It's a silver metallic suit. It's not really what the aliens look like, so I really can't tell you what the aliens look like. But anyway, I wanted to show you that picture there. The other thing that I wanted to mention was that I told you do not buy the book, The Trilogy of Life. It is way too expensive. It is also way too complicated. It's very disorganized. I wrote it for my grandchildren. What you do need to buy, or you can buy, is the book that's coming out just in the next couple of weeks called Papa Lee and the Aliens, Volume 1. You can get it on Lulu.com. It's actually a teaching guide or a study guide for these series that I'm going to be giving. It's inexpensive. It's $19.98, and it may be worth your while to go ahead and get it so you can read about these episodes as you see them on the YouTube. So anyway, we're going to get started on the first universe. This particular episode is dedicated to all you atheists and agnostics out there, since this is how you believe. The next episode, however, may change your mind. But until then, you can believe that the universe was just a mistake, a happenstance. When I wrote these books 8 years ago, I knew that everyone would think I was crazy about the existence of a prior universe. Recently, scientists have agreed with me on the possibility of the first universe. In the special collector's edition of Scientific America, right here, came out last fall, the scientists talk about what came before the Big Bang. Cosmologists refer to these occurrences or other Big Bangs as bounce. Anyway, crazy or not, here goes. Trillions and trillions of years ago, there was nothingness. Nothingness is defined as a void. This nothingness was composed of equal parts of matter photons and antimatter photons. A photon is an elementary particle, the quantum of light, in all forms of electromagnetic radiation. A photon has a 0 charge and a 0 mass and can exist in a vacuum in the absence of time and space. These matter and antimatter photons were in constant conflict with one another, negating their existence and maintaining nothingness. In other words, one antimatter photon plus one matter photon equals 0 or nothingness. Before we go any further, I need you to become acquainted with some laws of nature. I'll call these answers of law or laws Papa Lee's principles. Some of them are proven and some of them aren't. The first thing you need to understand are the 4 forces of nature. Strong nuclear forces is the first force. Forces that hold elements together. Think of the element uranium. When you break it apart, it releases a tremendous amount of energy in the form of an atomic bomb. So strong nuclear forces is the first force. The second force is electromagnetism. In your science classes, I'm sure you remember wrapping a piece of wire around a nail and hooking it up with a current of electricity and producing a really strong magnet. This is a very powerful force in nature. It's one of the principles on which electromagnetic trains actually travel. So it's a powerful force. Weak nuclear forces, these are forces that hold an atom together. In other words, if you take a hydrogen atom and break it apart, it's extremely difficult to break apart into its protons and electrons. So the first 3 is strong nuclear forces, electromagnetic forces, and weak nuclear forces. The fourth one is gravity. Gravity is the force that is not understood by scientists. It's one that they can't explain. All of the other forces, the top 3 forces, have a value of what they consider to be 1200. I don't know what it is, 1200. But gravity only has a value of 5. In order to explain gravity, scientists have created this mystical force called dark energy. Dark energy. I will tell you the answer later of what dark energy consists. Here are some definitions that you must be familiar. Matter. Anything with mass. Stuff you can see, solid, liquid, or gas. Matter is anything you can see out there. It's visible to us. The other thing, that definition, is antimatter. Antimatter is defined as anything composed of antiparticles, which to me doesn't really explain anything. Scientists really do not know anything about antimatter. They cannot find, capture, or measure antimatter. They have been able to capture antimatter hydrogen for only 17 seconds in an electromagnetic trap. It would cost $63 trillion to capture 1 gram of antimatter hydrogen. That is approximately 15 times larger than our current annual national budget for the United States. I believe the reason that scientists cannot study antimatter is because of our next Pauli principle, the speed of antimatter light. Antimatter is too fast to be captured. The matter speed of light is the definition of it. First, everyone should know that Einstein proved that the matter speed of light can travel at 186,000 miles per second. The antimatter speed of light is a whopping 3 trillion miles per second. You say, whoa, where did you get this number? You won't be able to find it anywhere. In the Quran, verse 70.4, and I quote, "The angels and the Spirit ascend to him in a day, the measure of which is 50,000 years." Assuming the angels and the spirits were ascending from earth, you multiply 186,000 miles per second times 60 seconds times 60 minutes times 24 hours times 365 and 1/4 days times 50,000 years, and you come up with this huge number representing the total miles that the angels and the Spirit traveled. You then take this huge number and divide it by the number of seconds in 1 day. In other words, 60 seconds times 60 minutes times 24 hours. You come up with a little over 3 trillion miles per second. You will discover in the next episode that the angels and the Spirit are composed of antimatter. You will also discover that dark energy is antimatter hydrogen. There was an article that just came out, this week. I just picked it up on the floor at the store, and I'm going to read it. This is in National Geographic. Little article in here. In the beginning, an array of exotic particles and states of matter existed during the first instance of the universe, as seen in this graphic. One such possible particle is the Higgs boson, the so-called God particle, which could explain how fundamental particles acquire mass. Something out there is binding swarms of galaxies together. In this artist's conception, the invisible substance known as dark matter has formed a colossal cosmic scaffold holding the galaxies that form at the densest part of the web-like structure. And we're going to be talking about that later on, the cosmic web. And the thing is, the scientists do not know what dark energy is, but dark energy, or dark matter, is antimatter hydrogen. The principles here, some of the more answers are Pauli's principles, is that matter attracts matter. This is what gravity is based upon. Matter attracts matter. Antimatter attracts antimatter. Scientists do not know this. This right here. Scientists do not know this because they can't study it. I'm telling you that the answer is that antimatter attracts antimatter. The most important thing to remember is that antimatter repels matter. This is what is the main component of gravity. It's not the attraction of matter to matter. It's the fact that the powerful force of antimatter repelling matter is actually what causes the gravity to exist. Antimatter repels matter. Scientists do not know. They cannot study antimatter. The reason scientists cannot fully explain gravity is because only a portion of gravity's force is due to the attraction of matter to matter. The main unexplained portion of gravity is the repulsion of matter by antimatter hydrogen. Scientists believe that most of the antimatter today was destroyed in the Big Bang. The fact or answer is that scientists just cannot find antimatter because antimatter repels matter light. Here is another one of Pauli's principles that is most important. This is how we're going to create the elements in the next part B. The golden ratio. The definition of the golden ratio is two quantities are in the golden ratio if their ratio is the same as the ratio of their sum to the larger of the two quantities. You can read that a million times, and I know that 99% of you will not get that. The golden values ratio is 1.618. All they're saying is that if you were to take two lines and say they're 1 inch, and you divide this one here, this portion of the 1 inch is 0.618. This portion here is 0.618. If you add 0.618 and the total, you're going to get 1.618. If you take this line, 1, and divide it by 0.618, you're also going to get 1.618. So a golden ratio is the fact that you can add two numbers or two values, you get the same answer, or you can divide it or have a proportion and have the same answer. The only thing to remember is the number 1.618. This is where I lost everybody in the first book. Forget about the definition. Just remember the number 1.618. Here are some examples of the golden ratio in nature. And this is what I want you to remember mainly, is that when you're out there fishing or just walking through the park or anything, remember that the golden ratio is responsible for forming all of these things. You have a nautilus shell here. You have the flower, the seeds here. You have a galaxy, a cyclone, or a hurricane. All of these things is all examples of the golden ratio. These figures are formed, even the limbs coming off of a trunk of a tree, they're all formed by increasing the diameter of the next circle by 1.618. Here are some others. You have a squid or octopus. You have an elephant trunk. Even the length of your fingers of your metacarpals is all determined by the golden ratio, 1.618. So anyway, that's the main thing to remember. Don't get tied up into trying to learn all these different values, but just remember that it's out there in nature. And when you go out there walking around the park, just look for things like this. The last thing, the most feared chart in the world, is the periodic chart of elements. I hated the periodic chart of elements, and everybody else does too, except for chemists. The only three things you need to remember here is hydrogen, thinking of hydrogen bombs, helium, think of helium balloons, and lithium, you can think of lithium salts, whatever. Anyway, those are the only three things. Forget about everything else on this chart. Those are the only three things we're going to study, and we're going to form those in the next part B. And I'm going to show you how they were created by using the golden ratio. You only need to know three of these elements on this chart. You need to know the atomic mass of hydrogen, helium, and lithium. Atomic mass is the average atomic mass of all the isotopes or variations of these elements measured in grams per molecule. Hydrogen has an atomic mass unit of 1.008. Helium has an atomic mass of 4.003, and lithium has an atomic mass unit of 6.941. I don't expect you to remember any of these. I'm going to show you later how these elements were created. So now you're ready to learn about the first universe. This is where I lost everyone in the first book. My daughter-in-law, who has a terrible time with math and numbers, particularly fractions, told me that I really needed to dumb it down a lot. Well, this is as dumb as I can get, and I'm going to try really hard to explain it to you. And here goes. From nothing to something. Remember that trillions and trillions of years ago, there was nothingness, or a void, composed of equal amounts of matter photons and antimatter photons. Remember also that photons have a zero mass and can exist in a vacuum forever in the absence of time and space. I do not have the answer for the origin of the matter and antimatter photon. It's very possible that the information was not privy to the aliens or to the Akkadic record. What I feel is that they've always been in existence, because that is actually what creates nothingness. You can't see nothingness until the photons and antimatter photons come into existence. So that's really what I feel. The charges of energy were in constant conflict with one another, always trying to reach a state of equilibrium. Over a period of time, because of the matter photons' attraction to other matter photons, and because of the antimatter photons' attraction for other antimatter photons, these energies charges began to become organized. I'm going to show you these charts here. This is nothingness. Remember that nothingness is composed of matter photons, which are represented by the X's or pluses, and the antimatter photons are the negatives. These things were in constant conflict with each other. They were always negating each other, and when they negated each other, they became zero, and nothingness is what existed. Eventually, the attraction of the antimatter photons, remember that antimatter photons repel matter photons. They became organized, and a boundary was formed. And once this boundary forms, then nothingness becomes something. It comes into existence. So remember that part. The antimatter photon energy repelled the matter photon energy to form a boundary with the matter photon energy on the outside of the boundary and the antimatter photon energy on the inside of the boundary. Nothingness has now become something. The antimatter photon energy is more powerful than the matter photon energy because of its speed. Remember, E is equal to mc squared, with c being the speed of antimatter light. The antimatter photons attract the other antimatter photons until it causes an involution of the boundary. And remember that this is a three-dimensional space. When I showed you that picture of the something with the positive charges on the outside and the negative charges on the inside, remember this is a round sphere, and this sphere has three dimensions. So you can picture yourself pushing your finger into a balloon that's been blown up, and that's how you'll see an involution. I'm going to show you that right now. Remember, you had the round something. These negative or antimatter photons, remember that antimatter is more powerful than matter photons. They begin to attract each other. And when they do this, they pull this inside. And this is what we call an involution. It's like pushing your finger into that balloon. And it's going to continue until that involution breaks off and forms another balloon inside a bigger balloon. And this inside balloon is actually going to be antimatter, and we're going to call it antimatter something else. And this is going to be matter something. One thing to look here at is that on the matter something, remember that the positive, matter photons were on the outside, the antimatter photons were on the inside. It's just the opposite here, because you have your antimatter photons on the outside and your matter photons on the inside. So this is antimatter and this is matter. The involution continues until there's another sphere inside the something. We would call this sphere something else. The outer shell of something will have matter photons on the outside and antimatter photons on the inside of the shell. Something else will have antimatter photons on the outside of its shell and matter photons on the inside. Always remember that something and something else are always trying to reach equilibrium. They're always trying to return to nothingness. Because of the attraction and repulsion, a vibration develops in the periphery of something and something else. I just want to show you this. Remember, this was a round balloon with another balloon on the inside. I told you that the antimatter photons are much more powerful than the matter photons, and that the antimatter photons also repel the matter photons. So because of these attractions here and the repulsions here, you're going to get a vibration setup in not only the outside balloon but also on the inside balloon. These vibrations become very, very intense, and eventually they're actually going to cause the antimatter balloon on the inside to rupture out, releasing a tremendous amount of energy and causing the Big Bang. Eventually the vibrations become so intense that the matter photons and the antimatter photons split apart, creating a tremendous amount of energy and light. Time and space now come into existence. Matter and antimatter mass, or elements or atoms, cannot form without the presence of time and space. The first Big Bang has occurred. You might note here that the vibrations themselves created by the antimatter and matter attractions and repulsions were actually the first infamous Higgs boson particle, or God particle. In the presence of time and space, matter and antimatter quarks form. Because of the antimatter quark speed is so much faster than the matter quark speed, the antimatter quarks form a shell around the matter quarks. Remember, the antimatter quarks will be repelling or pushing against the matter quarks, forcing them inward. The quarks is the most simplest form of mass. It takes 3 quarks to form 1 proton or 1 electron and 1 neutron. We had our vibrations here. The inner balloon broke out of the outer balloon and caused the first Big Bang. The antimatter speed is so much faster that it organizes on the outside of the matter universe, or the inside or matter balloon, and the first elements will start forming. So what you have after the Big Bang is you're going to have a center core of matter mass, or matter plasma, and then you're going to have an outer core surrounding it of antimatter mass. So this is what we're going to begin with next episode. We're going to end here. Nucleosynthesis, or the formation of the first elements, are going to start taking place, and that's what we're going to take up in part B. It's going to be pretty interesting. It's going to be hard to follow, but I'm going to try to make it real simple. So I'm going to say Papa Lee signing off, and we'll see you next episode. Good night.